Welcome everybody to the All City Taxi Talk Show. And this is going to be like a four-part interview with the incredible Michael Holman, who's an absolute, legend of the downtown scene in Manhattan. This is part one, and we're going to be talking about, when he was in a band called The Tubes. We're going to be talking about, the disco era in New York. We're going to be talking about fashion, all that old kind of 70s style wicked fashion. We're going to be talking about the first time Michael see, a whole car sprayed, which absolutely blew his mind, a full kind of top to bottom, a full burner, which was absolutely amazing. And we're going to be talking about, the gangs of New York from the 1970s. So this is part one. And please, whatever you do, subscribe to this channel because, what I'm bringing here is absolutely incredible history. So please press the subscribe button and check out all the interviews. But yeah, this is part one. So yeah, this is absolutely wicked. Lights, camera, action. On this week's show, we have artist, musician, theatre director and producer, also filmmaker who released the early 80s classic Graffiti Rock program. We have from London all the way over to the Big Apple, we have the one and the only Michael Holman in the place. Yes. How you doing, my man?
Chillin'. Thank you for having me on, man.
And as I said to you, you don't age. You look absolutely incredible.
Thank you. New York keeps me young.
We're going to take it back to the start, back to the root, back to where it all kind of started. So I'm really, really looking forward to having a chat. So first two questions I always ask is, whereabouts are you from and what was it like growing up as a youngster?
Well, I'm an Army brat. That means I grew up in the military in the 60s and 70s, really the 60s. And lived all over the United States, lived all over Europe, as my father was stationed in Germany and France, and we were on the East Coast and the West Coast. But I was born in San Francisco, in Presidio, a military base called the Presidio. It's now owned by George Lucas. Always appreciated being in different places and meeting a lot of different people. I was exposed to a lot of countries and cultures, as a young kid. Before I was 10 years old, I traveled over, half the world. But in many ways, my biological roots are in San Francisco. I was born there, like I said, came back there many different times, went to high school and university there. And when I graduated in 78, I moved to New York for good.
And is that where basically like the magic happened when you went to New York?
Yeah, in many ways. I mean, before I came to New York, I had been involved with some interesting cultural phenomenons on the West Coast. I was in a band called The Tubes, which has a huge following in England, by the way. It was one of the early theatrical rock bands equivalent to Alice Cooper and David Bowie, Spiders from Mars. The Tubes was a band that would present about 10, 12 songs in a night to a live audience, and each song had costumes and dancers and props and sets, and it was theatrical rock in a way, theatrical art rock, and that was a big deal because that was my baptism into both show business and art and performance all at the same time. So that was really instrumental, as well as being in the Tubes, traveling to the East Coast on one of their tours in the mid 70s. I got to really see New York in a way that blew my mind and opened my eyes to then give me the appreciation and the desire to be a part of New York, to live in New York, and it allowed me to be cognizant of all the amazing cultural gifts that New York has and how I would one day become involved in it.
100%, because New York back in the 70s there must have been so much flavor and style. I mean, it must have been absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, seeing the trains of the mid 1970s with all the fantastic graffiti on them, it must have blew your mind. You must have thought, wow, I've arrived in in heaven on this in this amazing place.
You must have been reading my mind or hearing some of my other interviews, because that's very much what happened for me. Moving to New York in 1978, after having visited a number of times in the mid-'70s, 74, 75, and seeing the beginnings really of what would become hip hop culture, which back then it was a combination of disco, urban disco, inner city disco, as it meets a lot of other things, funk and soul, and dance and Caribbean aesthetics, Puerto Rican, Jamaican, all these things kind of coming together created hip hop, which I'm really happy to get into how that happened in a minute. But getting back to those early days when I would visit to New York, like I said, came here as a performing and touring artist in the Tubes, saw New York from that perspective, going to David's Loft, which was the happening disco at the time, going to Les Jardins, going to the Hollywood, the Blue Angel. These are all these underground clubs in Manhattan, the roller rink, the Empire roller rink in Brooklyn. This is all before Studio 54.
Was the legendary disco DJ Grandmaster Flowers, was you hearing him spinning on the decks playing the disco?
Back in the mid-'70s?
Yeah.
No, I wasn't aware of him. I didn't live in New York. And if I had lived in New York, I'm sure I would have. But being a visitor, coming here a couple of times, a couple of days or a couple of weeks at a time, my exposure, and by the way, having disco DJs from New York coming, of course, to visit California, coming my hometown, San Francisco, which was a huge disco city, as was Los Angeles. Having many New York DJs come to visit, disco DJs, downtown disco DJs, I was exposed to a lot of gay Italian DJs from Brooklyn who were rocking the Sanctuary or David's Loft or a lot of these other clubs or Infinity or a lot of clubs that were downtown that I checked out. I was going to a lot of these clubs. I was one of the straight guys going to the gay clubs, picking up all the models, because I'd be one of the only straight guys that would get on the floor and dance, one of those kind of things. So interestingly, in 74, my parents had moved from California to Washington, D.C. So I come out on a visit in 74 to D.C. and with my cousins, and we were all in university at the time. I'm going to University of San Francisco. My cousins are going to school near D.C. And a friend of theirs lives in upstate, up in Mount Vernon, which is just above New York City. So I drive them all in my little blue Volkswagen from D.C. to New York for my real first visit to New York as kind of a grown-up, right? As kind of somebody, I must have been like 19, but I was old enough to be cognizant of culture and what New York was, why it was special, whatever. So we do something insane. On a Sunday afternoon, this is the most lawless New York. This is when the budget for the city budgets are so low that there's a recession, there's no money. The police don't have a budget, so they're leaving everyone basically alone. People are basically doing what they want. Yeah, there's a lot of crime, but the rents are really low. Anyway, it's in that atmosphere. Every Sunday afternoon at Bethesda Fountain, which is a big part of Central Park, right at 72nd Street and 5th Avenue. If you go into the park at 72nd Street on that east side of Central Park, and you go in and you walk for 5 minutes, you'll come to this place called Bethesda Fountain. And it's, I'd say about 2 acres of cobblestone, a big fountain, a little pond that you can row boats in, not that small, big enough pond that you can row boats in and rent a boat and row. And along this cobblestone, starting at about noon, kids would come, and I mean like street kids from all over New York City, from the Bronx, from Brooklyn, from Queens, from Manhattan, from Harlem. Kids would come from all over the city with boom boxes. They'd show up at this area, this cobblestone area that had hills just past it of grassy hills. They'd lay out 50 to 100 boom boxes, all facing the fountain and the cobblestones, all tuned to one single radio station, WBLS, with Frankie Crocker spinning records. And it became this outdoor jam party with maybe as many as 20 dudes, 20 black and Puerto Rican cats rocking congas, bongos, glass bottles, cowbells, all to a collect. It could have been like, you know, MFSB's Love Is the Message coming out of 50 radios, and people are rocking to it, and everybody talking about the Latin hustle. That was the height of the Latin hustle. And this is the sunshine. This is like 12 noon, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And there on these cobblestone area around the fountain would congregate mostly teenagers, young people, coming from all over the city, wearing the latest gear. What was the latest gear? It was thrift shop gear, like 1930s zoot suits, peg pants with big, pants that would peg down at the shoe with big, what do you call them? Folds in the top of the pants. I forget what they're called now, pleats, whatever. Marshmallow shoes, which were these kind of like nurse shoes with big white soft platforms, but even bigger than a nurse would wear, with all crazy colors, reds and blues and whites and mixed rainbow colors in the shoe. Izod like top shirts, but like with all kinds of crazy patterns in them, like real Grateful Dead, like little bears and cowboy patterns and prints, all on these Izod shirts, like little kids' pajama prints, with newsboy caps, right? Like newsy caps, those flat roadster caps, brought down thing, or maybe gangster fedoras, and or wearing big shoulder pad thrift, and all these clothes we bought from thrift shops. Everything came from thrift shops. They were all clothes from the 30s and 40s. And because they were made back in the 30s and 40s, and because everything back then was made with such skill and such care and such well-made clothing, they lasted into the 70s. And it wasn't really that long.
Big time.
Yeah, it wasn't. And they were such high quality clothes. That's what everyone wore at the disco.
Wow.
1930s and 40s, like Cab Calloway zoot suit like clothes. The women wore these like 1940s like summer dresses, like made out of nylon or whatever, with their hair done like a Rosie the Riveter type 1940s hairdos, with pencil eyebrows, like very Betty Boop 30s thing. Everybody wearing platforms. That's how we dressed.
How about the hairstyles? Was you busting like the big afros and all that?
Yeah, hell yeah, big afros. But some kids were rocking Caesars and wearing caps, but a lot of afros. And we're all doing the Latin hustle. but also we're doing at this stage the bus stop, which is really when it first came out. Now, formation dances, you know, like the electric glide, like people do now. Formation dances go back to the 1950s with the Madison that came out of Baltimore or something. But those and maybe they were even before the 1950s. But those formation dances would show up and then disappear for a decade, and then show up again. So anyway, the bus stop shows up during the height of disco, and it's a variation on the Madison. And we're all doing the bus stop. I mean, it's so much fun. But the freestyle dancers like me would always be on the outside of the formation, so that when the formation would stop and everyone would do the little step when it stops, the freestyle dancers would go off and do their own thing with drops and splits and footwork and everything, and then jump up right when the formation takes off again. So there's a lot of freestyle dancing. This is going on before breaking. But what is also going on before breaking, props to California, is all the electric boogie, the robot, popping, locking. That's going on way before breaking. So, you know, that's going on 10 years before breaking. But anyway, so coming to New York as a Californian, which is the equivalent of, you know, coming to London from Bristol, you know, you don't fucking know what time it is, you know? Coming to New York from California, I'm just like seeing the scene at Bethesda Fountain. And that moment, Steve, I knew, I don't know when, but I'm moving to New York, man.
Michael, it must have been kind of like a religious experience, like entering a church and, you know, you've seen what's going on. Must have been amazing, incredible.
You know, the feeling was like, it was like, and again, I'm not a New Yorker, and maybe a New Yorker would be used to it, but being an outsider and seeing this culture that the kids had created on their own, no adult was putting this together. It was the kids bringing their own radios, the kids who were dressing up, kids who were dancing, kids who, you know, by kids, I mean, of course, you know, teenagers, young adults. And I'm realizing, oh my God, New York is like a theme park for thinking grown people. It's like a Disneyland made by the hippest motherfuckers ever. It's like a place where the street rules, and only the best from the street dictates what those rules are. And I saw the coolest dancing. I mean, I'd never seen anybody. I was used to being from California. There's a lot, let me tell you, there's a lot of good dancers from California. And even in Los Angeles is known for being one of the capitals of dance. Hardly any place can fuck with California, can fuck with LA. And same with the Bay Area. But when I came to New York and I saw people dancing and styling, and the way they spoke, and their whole attitude, and the way that they saw themselves as New Yorkers, it was like my mind was dripping out of my ears, man. I was like, oh my God, this is like the coolest place on earth. And it's an experience that even if you haven't been anywhere else on earth, you know it is. You know it's true. Now, New York has changed a lot, but at that time, it was the coolest place on earth.
On the planet,
everything about it, the sights, the sound, on the planet, everything about it at that one moment at Bethesda Fountain on that Sunday afternoon made it clear to me that this is my destiny, is to be part of this story.
And part of this scene. Yeah, part of this scene growing. Yeah, amazing.
I saw it at Bethesda Fountain in '74. I saw a lot of hints of how disco would transform itself into hip hop, what would eventually be called hip hop, because it wasn't even called hip hop until like really '82. But I could see not the fashion, because hip hop kids would have been the younger brothers and sisters of that generation. The hip hop kids would have been the younger cousins of the kids who were at that Bethesda Fountain that day. See, hip hop was all about going to the store and getting Lee jeans that were brand new. And just to keep the crease in it, you'd stitch a crease in it. Your mom would stitch a seam in the front of it. Brand new Adidas, brand new Puma, brand new nylon shirts, gold chain. It was all about being sharp, new, shiny, untouched. Their older brothers and sisters and cousins of the disco era that I was describing to you at that Bethesda Fountain was all about going to a thrift shop, and what was cool was wearing the cool gear of people from 30 or 40 years ago. That's cool, and it was cool because Dr. Buzzard's original Savannah band wore that gear, who did Tommy Mottola, lived on the Cherchez La Fin. That disco moment was a New York disco, but with a real swing 1930s, 40s Cab Calloway vibe. And that's why everyone jumped on it. And I have to tell you the truth, again, this is going to blow a lot of minds, but it wasn't really Dr. Buzzard's original Savannah band who pioneered that 1930s, 40s thrift shop look. To be honest, it was Bette Midler and this whole Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy from Company B song that she did, dressing up with her and her friends, and just one number on her live show, like 1940s World War II, female soldiers in uniform. And then she would wear even more thrift shop gear, and that caught on in the gay community, and then it caught on from the gay community to the urban disco community by association. And you have to give Bette Midler props. Now, what's interesting is, of course, the next generation is not going to want to be into what the generation before did. It's like whack. It's tired. It's like boring. You know, my older brother did that. I've got to find my own voice. I've got to find my own style. And so what happened is these peg leg pants with pleats and marshmallow shoes and you know, these airbrush pajama tops and Applejack caps and all that. That gave way to Kangol caps. Thank you, England. Gave way to Kangol caps. Gave way to nylon shirts. Gave way to Lee jeans. Gave way to brand new sneakers. Adidas. Thank you, Germany. It was a brand new vibe. Hip hop introduced a brand newness. This is new. This is fresh. And it makes sense. I never even thought of this until right now, Steve. Never thought of this until right now. Why would a brand new look that was introduced after the thrift shop look be associated with hip hop as opposed to the old school look that was associated to disco? I'll tell you, I think, and I'm a real armchair anthropologist, as you can tell, because hip hop, and this again, I bring in Grandmaster Caz. Grandmaster Caz once famously said, hip hop didn't invent anything. It reinvented everything. That's a famous quote, and it's so true. And so if you're a culture that's all about sampling and taking from past ideas and deconstructing them and making them into something new, then newness is the operative word. So you're gonna take a fashion, Adidas, which maybe is like some German guy made up, or Lee jeans, which was for some Midwest aesthetic, or nylon t-shirts, which was for something else, and you're going to say, you're gonna sample them. You're gonna sample fashion in essence, and you're gonna put it together and make a new song. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's a good way to explain it. Yeah, all about the sampling. Yeah, 100%.
So they sampled fashion. They sampled fashion and turned it into their own. They took other people's fashions the same way they took other people's music. See, because disco, that was maybe the very end of the 60s and the 50s and 40s, in that real musicians made real music. It's
a very interesting way to look at it, without a doubt.
So to your point about eventually, so in 78, 4 years after this Bethesda Fountain experience, in those 4 years, I'd gone back to California. I dropped out of that band, The Tubes, because, you know, I had to please my parents and get a degree, and I did. Went back to school, got a degree in economics for what, I don't even know. I came to New York, but I just had to come to New York. And I got a job at Chemical Bank as a banker, Wall Street banker. Like, that's like working in the city, you know? It's like, what? It's like, I was a banker, a junior banker, wearing a Brooks Brothers suit, the whole 9 yards. And I lived down in the Tribeca, and I jump on the one train, just a couple of stops to get to Wall Street, because Tribeca is just above Wall Street. And I jump on the one train, my little suit and tie, briefcase, and these trains would roll in the station, man. Damn. It was the same kind of feeling that I'm feeling almost verklempt here. I'm feeling very emotional right now, because that same shock, culture shock that I felt experiencing dance and music and freelance, freestyle party culture in New York in 74 at Bethesda Fountain, that same shock I felt standing on the subway platform, probably exhausted because I'd been up all night partying before, going to Max's Kansas City or wherever, and a train rolls in. And I'd never seen this before. This would have been 78. Train rolls in, top to bottom, burner, right? Just like that's a whole car. It wasn't a whole train, but it was a whole car. Windows were covered, the whole 9 yards. And I'm standing there, and I'm amongst, and it's not a heavily populated neighborhood, so there's maybe like 4 or 5 other people waiting to get on the same train, dressed the same way, going downtown. And I see this train come by, and I wake up like a motherfucker. It's just like my mind exploded awake. Talk about being woke. the first thing I did, I'm looking at this train coming in, and I'm looking at the art on it, and my first thought was, not as a native New Yorker and as a new transplant to the city, I'm looking at the other people, like looking for some cue as to what am I supposed to make out of this? Like, are they looking at it the same way? No, everybody else on the platform was just like half asleep, watching the train come in, waiting to get on the train, waiting for the doors to open and get in. And I'm just like, what is this?
Check this out. Yeah, look, this is it. Wow.
And nobody seemed to notice it. But I'm just like, I almost didn't get on the train because I had to see. But that was another
pivotal moment.
Pivotal moment.
Yeah, Michael, can you remember vaguely what the piece said, or who it was by? Can you sort of remember that or not?
No, I can't remember anything other than it was super colorful. It had characters. It had letters. It might have said something. I'm sure it did say something. It could have been some Lee Kyona's piece that if I saw it again, I'd go, oh yeah, I know that. I've seen it a million times. But seeing it for the first time, and to your point too, earlier point was when I saw it, I thought this city is run by someone else other than the city government. This city, this is a tale of two cities. That's what it felt like to me. It felt like, yeah, New York City as a municipality has garbage collectors and police and firemen and all these different things that cities have. But then there was this shadow city that had its own rules and its own officials and police and leaders and people, and it was that city that started to become louder and louder and louder in my ear. And it was what I was always coming to New York to find. And sure enough, look, I came at one of the best times. I came in '78 and then would visit in the mid '70s. Couldn't have been a better time. I know it. It must have been absolutely magical. It must have, as we said earlier, blew your mind. So magical that in spite of the coronavirus shutdown, in spite of the fact that the World Trade Centers came down and they put this like ugly fucking building up in its place. I try not to look at it. In spite of the fact that so many cool kids are dead, in spite of the fact that so many tired motherfuckers have come and taken their place, in spite of how much New York has changed, in spite of all the clubs being gone, all of those first impressions still are with me in a way that I'd never give up on New York. Nah. I'm still wrecked by this city. You still absolutely love it. Oh yeah. But Michael, going back to the 70s in New York, gang culture was absolutely massive in New York. You had gangs like the Imperial Bachelors, the Savage Nomads, Savage Skulls, the Javelins, the Ghetto Brothers, the Dirty Ones, the Tomahawks, the Savage Seven that later become the Black Spades. Now, did you see any kind of gang culture there, like with the flying cut sleeves and gangs? Yeah, I did actually. It's funny that you mentioned that. I did. In '74, when Education of Sonny Carson came out, which is great because it shows a lot of that culture in a really, really genius way. Some of the names, I don't know. The film Education of Sonny Carson? Yeah. So in '74, when I first came to New York to visit with my cousins and their friend from Mount Vernon, we're in the train going to Les Jardins, going from downtown to uptown. I don't know why or how, I can't remember the scenario, but there we are, either at 42nd Street or 34th Street. It was one of these stations that has the local and express trains, all 4 tracks in one station. So I don't remember which day, but I'm pretty sure it's probably 34th Street, R train or something. And we're on the local platform, and on the express platform, it shows up one of these, filthy few type gangs. New York gangs who, by the way, their fashion is emulating the Hells Angels.
And the Outlaws, yeah.
Flying colors, cut sleeves,
Hmm.
the big boots, the biker boots, the jeans, the blah, blah, blah. But it's a black and Puerto Rican gang. And I'll never forget, as I'm looking at this, the gang is made up of all kinds of people, all kinds of men and women, black and Puerto Rican for the most part, but all ages, big, small, little. And there's some kid, like 12 years old, tiny kid. And then there's some like 30-year-olds. And they're going to Brooklyn, I'm almost sure. And there was just this moment when they were intimidating all the people on the platform. And I'm watching this and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is just another ride on this theme park called New York that I'm experiencing. And because I'm on the local platform and they could never get to me unless they decide to run up the stairs and run across and come down, which I wouldn't put it past them, I was safe enough to at least watch. I wasn't gonna like shout out anything, but I'm watching this. And again, it's just like another ride on this crazy theme world called New York. And it was during that time of Education of Sonny Carson, 74. So I did get to see a little bit of that. I didn't experience it. I didn't hang out with them. Of course, years later, when I came to New York and got involved with Zulu Nation and got involved with a lot of different people like that, I got to meet like Bambaataa and people like that who were Black Spades and and then of course more recently, Yellow Benji, rest in peace. My good friend Shan Nicholson and my good friend Shan Nicholson and I have done a lot of projects together. He on his own created a seminal documentary called Rubble Kings.
Oh, Rubble Kings, yeah, it's great. It's a really, really good documentary. I love it. Brilliant. Yeah.
The Rubble Kings is all about, it's one of the best, most comprehensive documentaries about the gangs of New York in the 70s during this incredibly bloody time in the Bronx. And I got to become friends with Benji Melendez, Yellow Benji, who's the leader of the Ghetto Brothers. Shannon and I wrote a screenplay based on the documentary, and that's something we're shopping now. So keep your eyes out for that. So yeah, please join me. Don't go anywhere. Please join me for part 2. This is going to be part 2, and we're going to be talking about Michael, about the the importance and the downtown art scene in New York back in the early 80s. Meeting Fab Five Freddy, the Fabulous Five, holding his first kind of party in 1979, the Canal Zone, where he met Jean-Michel Basquiat. We're going to be talking about how they formed the group Grey. We're going to be talking about Cool Keith from Ultramagnetic MCs. We're going to be talking about the New York City Breakers, and a lot more. So please join me. Don't go anywhere. And also make sure you press the subscribe button, which is down here somewhere. Press subscribe and check out all the other interviews. But yeah, please join me for part 2, because you do not want to miss this. Peace.